blood stained the antique Persian rug, a billionaire father on his knees begging a monster in a bespoke Tom Ford suit. "Take her," William pleaded, shoving his pageant-winning size 0 daughter forward. "Take the pretty one, I beg you." But Lord Croft's glowing crimson eyes slid completely past the weeping perfection. They locked onto the girl shivering in the shadows, the forgotten, overweight sister who had spent 20 years as the family's punching bag. "No," the vampire lord purred, his voice dropping to a dangerous possessive rumble. "I want her." The storm that hit Mercer Island, Washington, that Tuesday evening was unnatural. The sky didn't just darken, it bruised, turning a violent shade of violet before the rain began to lash against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Montgomery estate. Hazel Montgomery sat on the cold tile of the kitchen floor, hiding in the dark pantry. At 22, Hazel had learned that making herself invisible was the only way to survive in her father's house. She pulled her oversized, threadbare grey cardigan tighter around her broad shoulders. She was a size 18 in a family that worshipped a size 0. Her sister Vivian was a former Miss Washington, a statuesque blonde with razor-sharp cheekbones and a heart as cold as dry ice. Hazel, with her soft, plush curves, round cheeks, and quiet demeanor, was the family's dirty secret. "Hazel, you fat cow! Where did you put my Chanel pearls?" Vivian's shrill voice echoed from the grand staircase. Hazel squeezed her eyes shut, a half-eaten dinner roll clutched in her trembling hand. Eating was her only comfort, the only armor she had against the relentless verbal abuse of her father and sister. Her father, William Montgomery, was a tech mogul on paper, but behind the closed doors of their $30 million mansion, he was a desperate man drowning in a hidden, terrifying world of debt. Tonight, the dogs in the yard were dead silent. The security system, a state-of-the-art matrix, had quietly deactivated itself at exactly 9 p.m. Hazel heard the heavy oak front doors groan open. No alarms, no knock, just the sudden, suffocating shift in the air pressure that made her ears pop. A scent rolled through the house, petrichor, old money, and copper. "William!" a voice called out. It wasn't loud, but it resonated in Hazel's very bones. It was a voice carved from velvet and ice. Hazel crept out of the pantry, pressing her heavy frame against the marble wall of the hallway to peer into the grand foyer. There stood Desmond Croft. He was a nightmare wrapped in breathtaking elegance. Tall, with shoulders broad enough to eclipse the doorway, he wore a tailored charcoal suit that clung to a lethally graceful physique. His hair was dark as a raven's wing swept back from a face so perfectly symmetrical it looked sculpted from marble. But it was his eyes that betrayed his nature. They were a swirling, luminescent crimson. He was a vampire lord of the Pacific Northwest Syndicate, and he had come to collect. William Montgomery stumbled into the foyer, his face the color of spoiled milk. He collapsed to his knees, his expensive silk pajamas wrinkling against the rug. "Lord Croft," William stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. I have the money. The offshore accounts they just need to clear." "Do not insult my intelligence, William," Desmond interrupted, his tone laced with a terrifying calm. "You lost the last of your liquid assets in Macau 3 days ago. You owe the syndicate $50 million. The grace period expired at midnight." Vivian, hearing the commotion, hurried down the stairs. When she saw Desmond, she froze. Despite the paralyzing fear radiating from the vampire, Vivian's vanity overpowered her survival instinct. She stood taller, pushing her chest out, adjusting her silk robe to show off her slender, perfect legs. She knew who the syndicate lords were. They were the hidden kings of the world. "The pact is simple, William," Desmond said, taking a slow, measured step forward. His leather shoes made absolutely no sound. "Blood or coin? You have no coin. Therefore a tithe must be paid. A life for a life." William's eyes darted frantically. He looked at Vivian, who suddenly realized the danger. She shrank back, her haughty demeanor crumbling. "Take her!" William suddenly shouted, lunging forward to grab Vivian by the wrist and yanking her down the stairs. Vivian shrieked, tripping over her robe and landing hard on her knees next to her father. "Daddy, no, what are you doing?" Vivian sobbed, tears ruining her perfect mascara. "Take the pretty one," William begged, shoving his golden child toward the vampire. "She's beautiful, pristine. She's won pageants. She'll be a perfect blood bride, a perfect servant. Just take her and clear my debt, I beg you." Desmond looked down at the weeping beauty queen. His expression didn't shift. He looked utterly bored. "You offer me a creature made of vanity and plastic," he murmured softly. How deeply insulting. Hazel's breath hitched in her throat. She tried to step back into the shadows of the hallway, but her heavy thigh bumped against a delicate side table. A porcelain vase wobbled and tipped over, shattering onto the marble floor with a deafening crash. Desmond's head snapped toward the sound. William and Vivian turned, staring at Hazel with utter disgust. Hazel froze, her face flushing crimson, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She looked like a complete mess, her dark, frizzy hair tied in a messy bun, wearing a stained cardigan and oversized sweatpants that did nothing to hide her bulk. Desmond slowly bypassed William and Vivian. He walked toward the dark hallway. With every step, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Hazel pressed her back against the wall, her breath coming in short, terrified gasps. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the monster to tear her throat out for interrupting. Instead, she felt a cold, incredibly gentle finger trace the line of her jaw. Hazel's eyes fluttered open. Desmond Croft was inches from her face. Up close, his beauty was overwhelming, almost painful to look at. He inhaled deeply, his chest expanding, and his crimson eyes flared with a sudden, violent intensity. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice a low, vibrating hum that made Hazel's knees weak. "Hazel," she whispered, her voice trembling. Desmond's eyes swept over her body, taking in her full, heavy figure, the soft curves she had spent her life trying to hide. There was no disgust in his gaze. Instead, there was a profound, terrifying hunger. Not just the hunger for food, but something deeper. He turned back to William, who was watching in horrified confusion. "I accept your tithe," Desmond announced, never taking his eyes off Hazel. "I will take her." William gasped. "Her Lord Croft, please no. She's practically a whale. She's a disgrace. You can't take the fat one. She's useless. Take Vivian, the pretty one." Desmond moved so fast that Hazel didn't even see a blur. 1 second he was standing beside her, and the next he had William lifted 3 feet off the ground by his throat. William choked his legs, kicking frantically in the air. "Speak of her with disrespect one more time," Desmond hissed, his fangs extending, gleaming pearlescent white in the dim light, "and I will tear your spine from your body and beat your perfect daughter to death with it. Is that understood?" William managed a frantic, gurgling nod. Desmond dropped him. William collapsed in a heap, coughing violently. Desmond straightened his cuffs, perfectly composed once again. He walked back to Hazel and offered her his hand. "Come, Hazel," he said softly. "You are leaving this wretched house." Hazel looked at his pale, outstretched hand. She looked at her father, who was glaring at her with venomous hatred, and at her sister, who was sobbing hysterically. For the first time in her life, someone was choosing her, even if it was a monster, even if she was walking to her death. With trembling fingers, Hazel placed her large, soft hand into the cold, stone-hard grip of the vampire lord. The ride away from Mercer Island was suffocatingly silent. Hazel sat in the back of Desmond's midnight black Rolls-Royce Phantom, pressing herself against the plush leather door to keep as much distance between them as possible. The rain hammered against the tinted windows, blurring the neon lights of the Seattle skyline as they merged onto Interstate 90, heading deep into the rugged forested terrain of the Cascade Mountains. Hazel's heart hadn't stopped racing. She felt hyper-aware of her own body. The seatbelt dug into her fleshy stomach, and she anxiously pulled at the hem of her oversized sweater, a nervous tic she'd developed years ago. She was waiting for the inevitable. She was waiting for him to lunge across the seat, sink his teeth into her neck, and drain her dry. Why else would a creature of such terrifying power and aesthetic perfection choose her? It had to be a cruel joke. Or perhaps vampires simply preferred a heavier meal. Desmond sat on the opposite side of the spacious cabin, one leg crossed elegantly over the other. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking out the window. He was looking at her. His gaze was entirely unapologetic, tracing the soft, frightened curve of her cheek, the fullness of her lips, and the anxious flutter of her hands. "You're trying to make yourself small, Hazel." Desmond spoke, his voice cutting through the hum of the luxury engine. "It is entirely unnecessary." Hazel flinched, looking down at her lap. "I'm sorry, I don't take up this much room on purpose." A low rumble emitted from Desmond's chest, a sound that was half growl, half sigh. "I did not ask for an apology. I am merely observing that a woman of your substance should not diminish herself for the comfort of lesser creatures." Hazel frowned, confused. Substance, lesser creatures? Was he talking about her father? "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To my home, Croft Manor," he replied evenly. "You belong to me now. Your father's debt is settled. You will never see William or Vivian again. A strange mixture of profound relief and utter terror washed over her. She was free of her abusers, yes, but she was entirely at the mercy of a literal predator. 2 hours later, the Rolls-Royce pulled through massive wrought-iron gates, winding up a steep forested driveway until an imposing Gothic-style mansion emerged from the fog. Croft Manor was a fortress of dark stone, towering spires, and glowing amber windows. It was beautiful and terrifying. When the car stopped, Desmond exited first, holding an umbrella. He opened her door and offered his hand again. Hazel took it, stepping out into the cold mountain air. He led her inside, past towering double doors, into a grand foyer that made her father's $30 million home look like a cheap motel. Black marble floors, ancient tapestries, and a massive chandelier cast warm light over the imposing space. "Evelyn," Desmond called out. From the shadows, an older human woman appeared. She wore a neat black dress and had a kind, maternal face. "Yes, my lord. Take Hazel to the East Wing Master Suite. Draw her a bath. See that she is fed," Desmond instructed. He finally let go of Hazel's hand, though he seemed reluctant to do so. His crimson eyes met Hazel's wide, fearful brown ones. "Rest, Hazel. We will dine together tomorrow evening." Before she could ask any questions, he turned and vanished down a dark corridor, his footsteps completely silent. Evelyn smiled warmly. "Come along, dear. You look like you've been through a war." Hazel followed the housekeeper up a grand, sweeping staircase. Am I a prisoner?" Hazel asked timidly. Evelyn chuckled softly. "Oh, honey, if you're a prisoner, then Lord Croft has completely lost his mind. You're in the master suite. The last person who slept there was his mother 200 years ago." Hazel was led into a room that stole her breath. It was massive, decorated in rich jeweled tones of emerald and gold. A roaring fire burned in a massive stone hearth. But what made Hazel stop dead in her tracks was the wardrobe. The doors were open, revealing dozens of beautiful dresses, silk nightgowns, cashmere sweaters, and tailored slacks. "Go ahead," Evelyn encouraged. Hazel walked over, touching a stunning emerald green silk dress. She pulled it out and looked at the tag. It was a size 18. She rapidly checked a pair of slacks, size 18, a cashmere cardigan, 2XL. Tears welled in Hazel's eyes. "How?" she choked out. "How did he know I just met him tonight?" "Lord Croft has eyes everywhere, dear," Evelyn said softly, going into the adjoining bathroom to start the water. "He knew exactly who you were long before tonight. Your father thought he was hiding you, but the Lord sees everything." The next evening, Hazel stood nervously in front of a massive gilded mirror. She wore the emerald silk dress. It clung to her curves, highlighting the fullness of her breasts and the dramatic slope of her hips. It didn't try to hide her fat, it celebrated it. She felt completely exposed, yet undeniably beautiful, a feeling she had never experienced in her entire life. There was a knock on the door, and Felix, a pale, sharp-featured vampire with golden eyes, bowed low. "My lord awaits you in the dining hall, Miss Hazel." Hazel followed Felix down the sprawling corridors. When she entered the dining hall, Desmond was standing by the fireplace, nursing a glass of dark red liquid. He wore a crisp white shirt, the top 2 buttons undone, and dark trousers. When he saw her, he froze. The glass in his hand cracked slightly under the sudden pressure of his grip. His eyes slowly raked up and down her body. The air in the room grew heavy, thick, with an electric tension that made Hazel's skin prickle. "You are magnificent," Desmond breathed, taking a step toward her. Hazel blushed fiercely, looking at the floor. "Please don't mock me. Look at me, Hazel," he commanded, his voice a gentle, irresistible compulsion. She looked up. "I do not mock. I do not lie. You are a masterpiece of flesh and blood. Sit." He pulled out a chair for her at a long mahogany table. To her shock, the table was laden with incredible human food: roasted prime rib, garlic, mashed potatoes, buttered asparagus, and fresh baked rolls. "I assumed you would be hungry," Desmond said, taking his seat at the head of the table. He didn't have a plate, only his glass of blood. Hazel's stomach growled violently, betraying her. She reached for a roll, then hesitated. At home, Vivian would slap the bread out of her hand. Her father would make pig noises if she took a second helping. Desmond saw the hesitation. His jaw tightened, a flash of murderous rage passing through his eyes before he suppressed it. "Eat, Hazel. Eat as much as you desire. Do not ever hide your appetite from me. Every inch of you is perfect. and I will see you nourished." Tears pricked Hazel's eyes. She picked up the fork and took a bite of the prime rib. It was heavenly. For the first time in 22 years, Hazel ate until she was full, completely unashamed, while a centuries-old vampire watched her with absolute devotion. 2 weeks passed. The gilded cage of Croft Manor slowly became a sanctuary. Hazel's bruises, both physical and emotional, began to heal. Evelyn was wonderfully kind. Felix was fiercely protective. And Desmond was a puzzle. He didn't touch her. He didn't demand her blood. He spent his evenings walking with her through the estate's massive indoor greenhouse, asking her about her interests, her favorite books, and her dreams. He treated her like a queen, completely ignoring her physical insecurities and instead worshipping her presence. But Hazel was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She knew nothing in this world was free. Why her? Why the fat, broken girl from the shadows? One rainy afternoon, while Desmond was attending to syndicate business in Seattle, Hazel found herself wandering the restricted wing of the library. Felix had accidentally left the heavy iron door ajar. Curiosity overriding her caution, Hazel slipped inside. The room was filled with ancient scrolls, old maps, and modern filing cabinets. Sitting on Desmond's massive oak desk was a leather-bound dossier, and written on the tab in elegant calligraphy was her name, Hazel Rosier Montgomery. Hazel frowned. Rosier, that was her late mother's maiden name. Her mother Abigail had died in a boating accident when Hazel was only 2. She opened the file. Inside were financial records, birth certificates, and ancient lineage charts. As Hazel read through the documents, her blood ran cold. Her mother hadn't been just a wealthy heiress. Abigail Rosier was the last living descendant of the Rosier bloodline, a line of humans possessing sweet blood, a genetic anomaly that gave vampires incredible strength and immunity to sunlight. It was the rarest, most coveted blood in the supernatural world. Hazel flipped the page and gasped. It was a copy of her mother's will. "And to my daughter Hazel, I leave the entirety of the Rosier Trust valued at $300 million to be accessed upon her 22nd birthday." Her father didn't have the money. Hazel had the money. William had been keeping her beaten down, destroyed, and hidden away so she would never claim her inheritance. And Vivian, there was a DNA test in the file. Vivian wasn't Abigail's daughter. She was the product of William's affair with a secretary. Vivian wasn't a Rosier. She was worthless to the vampire world. Desmond knew. He had known everything. Suddenly, the heavy glass window of the library shattered inward. Hazel screamed, throwing her arms up as glass rained down across the Persian rug. The wind howled into the room, bringing the scent of wet earth and rotting meat. Crouched on the windowsill was a man, or what used to be a man. His clothes were ragged, his skin a sickening grayish yellow, and his eyes were completely black. He was a rogue, a starving feral vampire who had no syndicate and no master. The rogue sniffed the air, his black eyes locking onto Hazel. A vile, jagged smile stretched across his face, revealing rows of needle-like fangs. "Rosier," the rogue hissed, his voice sounding like 2 stones grinding together. "I smell it, the sweet blood. Desmond's keeping a little piggy all to himself." Hazel scrambled backward, tripping over a chair and crashing hard onto the floor. "Stay away from me," she yelled, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs. "So much flesh," the rogue sneered, leaping gracefully from the window and stalking toward her. "So much blood in those heavy veins. You'll feed me for a month, piggy." He lunged. Hazel squeezed her eyes shut, raising her arms to protect her throat, but the impact never came. A deafening roar shook the very foundations of the library. A blur of charcoal and crimson slammed into the rogue with the force of a freight train. The 2 vampires crashed through the massive wooden desk, splintering it into 1,000 pieces. Hazel scrambled to her feet, pressing herself into the corner of the room. Desmond stood over the rogue. His bespoke suit was torn, his human disguise completely gone. His face was monstrous veins pulsing black beneath his pale skin, his jaw unhinged to reveal massive, terrifying fangs. "You dare enter my home?" Desmond roared, his voice a demonic double octave. "You dare touch what is mine?" The rogue scrambled wildly, slashing his clawed hand across Desmond's chest. Blood, dark and thick, sprayed across the books. Desmond didn't even flinch. With a terrifyingly casual motion, Desmond grabbed the rogue by the throat, lifted him into the air, and plunged his free hand directly into the rogue's chest. A sickening crunch echoed in the room. Desmond ripped his hand backward, holding the rogue's still beating blackened heart. The rogue's body dissolved into ash before it even hit the floor. Desmond crushed the heart in his fist, letting the ashes fall. He stood there, chest heaving, blood dripping from his deep chest wound. His crimson eyes, fully feral and dilated with bloodlust, slowly turned toward Hazel. Hazel was terrified, but as she looked at the monster, who had just brutally murdered someone to protect her, she didn't run. She saw the deep gash on his chest. "Desmond," she whispered softly. He flinched at his name, taking a step back, trying to hide his monstrous face from her. "Do not look at me, Hazel. I am losing control. I am starved, and your scent—" He gripped the edge of a bookshelf, his knuckles turning white. "You must run. Go to Evelyn." "You're hurt," she said, taking a step toward him. She wasn't the scared, bullied girl in the pantry anymore. She was a rosier. "Hazel, stop!" Desmond pleaded, a desperate pained sound. "Your blood, it calls to me. I took you to protect you from William, to keep you safe from my own kind. I swore I would not drink from you until you offered, but the frenzy—" Hazel looked at the dossier on the floor, then up at Desmond. He had saved her. He had clothed her, fed her, and treated her like a goddess. She took another step, closing the distance between them. She reached out, her soft, plump fingers gently cupping his cold, sharp jaw. He shuddered violently at her touch, leaning his face into her palm. "Then drink," Hazel whispered fearlessly, tilting her head to the side, exposing the thick, pulse-jumping vein in her neck. Desmond groaned, a sound of absolute defeat and overwhelming desire. He wrapped his strong arms around her waist, pulling her heavy, soft body flush against his hard frame. "My queen," he breathed against her skin. He opened his mouth and his fangs sank into her flesh. The moment Desmond's fangs pierced the delicate skin of Hazel's neck, the world completely stopped turning. Hazel had braced herself for agonizing pain, for the brutal, tearing sensation she had seen in horror movies. Instead, what flooded her system was an overwhelming, intoxicating rush of pure liquid warmth. It was as if 1,000 suns had simultaneously ignited within her veins. The cold, damp chill of the shattered library instantly vanished, replaced by a radiant, thrumming energy that resonated deep within her bones. Desmond drank from her, his grip on her waist, fierce but astonishingly gentle. He was not tearing at her, he was taking only what was freely offered. As her blood flowed into him, Hazel felt a sudden, inexplicable connection forge between their minds. She could feel his profound, ancient loneliness, his terrifying power, and the desperate, cloying starvation that had threatened to consume him. But above all of that, she felt his absolute, unyielding reverence for her. He did not see a broken, overweight girl from Mercer Island. Through his mind's eye, Hazel saw herself as he saw her, a radiant, powerful goddess, a creature of boundless warmth and mesmerizing beauty. With a ragged, breathless gasp, Desmond suddenly pulled away. He stumbled backward, pressing the back of his hand against his mouth. His crimson eyes, previously clouded with feral bloodlust, were now wide, lucid, and glowing with an impossible, blinding brilliance. Hazel swayed slightly, her hand flying to her neck. 2 small, neat puncture wounds rested over her pulse point. They didn't bleed. Instead, they tingled pleasantly. She looked at Desmond, her heart hammering a frantic, triumphant rhythm against her ribs. "Your chest?" Hazel whispered, her voice barely breaking the heavy silence of the ruined library. Desmond looked down. The horrific, gaping wound the rogue vampire had slashed across his torso was already closing. The torn flesh seamlessly knit itself together, erasing the injury entirely within mere seconds. The agonizing pain was completely gone, replaced by a surge of vitality he had not felt in over 4 centuries. He fell to his knees amidst the shattered glass and splintered wood. He bowed his head, pressing his forehead against the Persian rug right at Hazel's feet. "Desmond, what are you doing?" Hazel asked, startled. She reached out, placing her soft hand on his broad shoulder. "Pledging my eternal soul," Desmond replied, his voice a rich, vibrating baritone that shook the floorboards. He slowly looked up at her, his expression one of pure awe. "Your blood, Hazel, it is life itself. The Rosier line is not a myth. You have restored me. You have bound my strength to yours. From this night forward, I am not your captor nor your master. I am your sword, your shield, and your servant. I belong entirely to you." Hazel stared at the devastatingly beautiful vampire lord, kneeling before her. For 22 years, her father had conditioned her to believe she was a burden, a disgusting mistake that took up too much space. Vivian had constantly reminded her that she was unlovable, yet here was one of the most powerful, lethal creatures on the planet, willingly submitting to her. She stood taller. The nervous, hunched posture she had carried her entire life evaporated. Her heavy curves, her thick thighs, her soft stomach, they were not flaws. They were the vessel of a legendary power. "Get up, Desmond," Hazel said. Her voice did not shake. It was calm, rich, and commanding. Desmond stood gracefully, his eyes tracking her every movement with a dark, possessive hunger. "The Syndicate will know of this soon," he warned softly, stepping closer to her. "A rogue breaching my perimeter means the scent of your blood is leaking, and there is something else." He gestured toward the scattered files on the floor. "Your father." Hazel's expression hardened. "William hid my mother's will. He stole my inheritance." He attempted to. Desmond corrected, a cruel, dangerous smile playing on his lips. "The Rosier Trust requires your physical signature upon your 22nd birthday. He kept you broken and terrified so you would never question your independence, never leave the house, and never seek legal counsel. He intended to file for power of attorney over you, claiming you were mentally unfit to access the $300 million. Bile rose in Hazel's throat. The sheer calculated malice of her own father was staggering. He hadn't just hated her appearance. He had weaponized it to steal her birthright. Meanwhile, miles away in a damp, miserable motel room on the outskirts of Tacoma, William Montgomery paced the filthy carpet like a caged animal. Vivian sat on the sagging bed, her blonde hair greasy and unkempt, weeping softly into a cheap tissue. "Stop crying, you useless girl!" William snapped, hurling a plastic cup at the wall. "Your tears won't get my bank accounts unfrozen. You gave Hazel to a monster?" Vivian shrieked back, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the cheap bedspread. "He took everything from us. He took our house, our cars, our money, because the debt wasn't fully satisfied." A smooth, chilling voice echoed from the corner of the room. William and Vivian froze. The shadows in the corner seemed to peel away, revealing a tall, gaunt man with slicked-back silver hair and eyes the color of old coins. He wore a tailored burgundy suit and carried a silver-tipped walking cane. "Lord Harrington!" William breathed, his knees automatically buckling in terror. Nathaniel Harrington, the treacherous head of the Eastern Washington Syndicate faction, smiled thinly. "Get up, William. Your groveling bores me. I hear Desmond Croft seized your assets and claimed your youngest daughter as a tithe. A rather strange choice for the illustrious Lord Croft, wouldn't you say? Unless the girl possesses something of extreme value." William swallowed hard. He knew he was playing with fire, but he was desperate. "She does. She is the last of the Rosier bloodline. Her blood is a catalyst. It grants immunity to sunlight and unparalleled physical power." Nathaniel's silver eyes widened slightly, a flicker of genuine shock crossing his aristocratic features. Then a slow, malevolent grin spread across his face. "Is that so? Desmond is hoarding a Rosier for himself. How deeply selfish of him, and how deeply advantageous for me." Nathaniel stepped forward, tapping his cane against the floor. "Here is the arrangement, William. You are still legally her father. We will attend the Winter Solstice Gala at Croft Manor next week. You will demand your daughter's return under the old Syndicate laws of familial right. When Desmond refuses, I will challenge him for his territory and the girl. Once I have her, I will give you back your pathetic little mansion and your frozen funds." William nodded eagerly. Yes, whatever it takes. I want my life back." Vivian looked up, her blue eyes narrowing with spiteful vindication. "I want to see Hazel dragged back to the gutter where she belongs." The week leading up to the Winter Solstice Gala was a whirlwind of preparation. The massive stone walls of Croft Manor were draped in black velvet and silver garlands. Chandeliers were polished until they gleamed like diamonds, and the air was filled with the scent of pine winter roses and expensive champagne. But the most significant preparation was happening inside the master suite. Hazel stood on a velvet pedestal, while three of the finest, most discreet supernatural tailors in the Pacific Northwest bustled around her. They were weaving magic into silk. "Pull the corset slightly tighter at the waist, but leave the hips generous," Desmond instructed from a leather armchair in the corner of the room. He was nursing a glass of bourbon, completely entranced by the sight of Hazel. Hazel looked at her reflection in the massive standing mirror. She hardly recognized herself. The dress was a masterpiece of midnight blue velvet and starlight silver embroidery. It featured a deep sweetheart neckline that proudly displayed her full, generous cleavage and a bodice that hugged her waist before flaring out over her wide hips in a dramatic, sweeping skirt. Her dark, frizzy hair had been tamed into luxurious, cascading waves pinned back with sapphire combs. She looked regal, she looked powerful, she was undeniably, unapologetically fat and absolutely breathtaking. "Desmond, is this not too much?" Hazel asked softly, her fingers tracing the intricate silver threading on her skirt. "The syndicate leaders, they will expect you to present someone like Vivienne, someone slender, traditional." Desmond set his glass down. In a blink, he was standing at the edge of the pedestal. The tailors immediately backed away, bowing their heads respectfully. Desmond reached up, placing his hands on Hazel's waist, his thumbs gently caressing the soft curve of her stomach through the velvet. "I do not care what the syndicate expects," Desmond said, his crimson eyes locking onto hers in the mirror. "They are parasites who cling to dead aesthetics. You are a living, breathing goddess. Tonight you do not walk into that ballroom as my captive. You walk in as Hazel Rosier, heiress to the Rosier Trust and the reigning sovereign of my heart. Let them look, let them envy me." Hazel felt a tear prick her eye, but she blinked it away. She would not cry tonight. Tonight she was going to war. The grand ballroom of Croft Manor was packed with the elite predators of the supernatural world. Vampires in haute couture milled about, sipping from crystal flutes filled with ethically sourced, medically bagged blood mixed with expensive wine. The chatter was a low, sophisticated hum. When the heavy mahogany doors at the top of the grand staircase opened, the music abruptly stopped. A hushed silence fell over the massive room. Desmond stepped out onto the landing. He wore a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo that perfectly matched Hazel's gown. He offered his arm and Hazel stepped out beside him. The collective gasp from the vampires below was audible. They stared at her. Hazel felt a momentary spike of panic, her old insecurities screaming at her to run and hide in the pantry. But then she felt Desmond's arms slip around her thick waist, grounding her. She felt the warmth of her own Rosier blood pulsing through her veins. She raised her chin, squared her broad shoulders, and began the descent. As they walked down the stairs, Hazel heard the whispers. "Who is she? Look at her presence. She commands the room." I have never smelled a scent so intoxicating. They reached the ballroom floor, and the crowd naturally parted for them, parting like the Red Sea before Moses. Desmond led her to the center of the room. He signaled the orchestra, and a slow, hauntingly beautiful waltz began to play. Desmond pulled Hazel into his arms, and they danced. Hazel, despite her size, moved with a surprising, breathtaking grace, her midnight blue skirt swirling around them like a stormy sky. For a few minutes, everything was perfect. Then the grand doors at the entrance of the ballroom violently crashed open. The music ground to a halt. The vampires turned, hissing their displeasure at the interruption. Standing in the doorway was Lord Nathaniel Harrington, leaning heavily on his silver cane, and flanking him, looking wildly out of place in their cheap, off-the-rack formal wear, were William and Vivienne Montgomery. Hazel froze, her grip tightening on Desmond's shoulder. Desmond did not flinch, but his jaw locked, and his eyes shifted from deep crimson to a terrifying glowing black. The temperature in the ballroom plummeted by 20 degrees. William marched forward, trying to look brave, though his knees were visibly trembling. He pointed a shaking finger at Hazel. "Hazel!" William shouted, his voice cracking. "Get over here right now! You are my daughter, and you are coming home!" Vivian sneered, crossing her arms. "But look at you squeezed into that dress like a stuffed sausage. It's pathetic, Hazel. Stop embarrassing the family and come here." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. The ancient aristocratic vampires stared at William and Vivian, as if they were squashed bugs on the bottom of a shoe. Desmond slowly unhanded Hazel. He took one single, terrifyingly calm step toward William. "You dare bring human filth into my home during the solstice?" Desmond asked, his voice a low, lethal purr that carried to every corner of the room. He looked past William, locking eyes with the silver-haired vampire. "Harrington, explain this intrusion before I sever your head from your shoulders." Nathaniel Harrington stepped forward, a smug, victorious smile on his face. "No need for hostility, Desmond. I am merely assisting a desperate father. Under the ancient laws of the Syndicate, a human father retains ownership of his unwed daughter. The tithe you claimed was illegal, as the girl's true value was hidden. William wishes to reclaim his property." "Property," Hazel repeated. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. William glared at her. "Shut up, Hazel. You have no idea what you are involved in. You have money that belongs to me. You are coming with us, and we are leaving this freak show." Desmond's fangs began to slowly descend. "She is no longer yours to claim, William. She is Hazel Rosier." A murmur rippled through the crowd of vampires at the mention of the legendary name. Nathaniel laughed. "Exactly. She is a Rosier, which means she is too valuable for one lord to hoard. Since you refuse to return the girl to her rightful human owner, Desmond, I invoke the right of challenge. I challenge you for the Seattle territory, your assets, and the Rosier girl." William turned to Hazel, an ugly, triumphant sneer on his face. "It's over, Hazel. You're going to give me the money, or Lord Harrington is going to bleed you dry in a cage. Come here, now." Hazel stood in the center of the room. For 22 years, she would have cowered. She would have apologized. She would have walked over to her father and let him crush her spirit all over again. But she was not that girl anymore. Hazel smoothly stepped past Desmond. She walked directly toward her father, her heavy velvet skirt sweeping imperiously across the marble floor. She stopped 2 feet away from him, towering over him in her heels. "No," Hazel said. William blinked, shocked. "What did you say to me, you fat bitch?" Without a single second of hesitation, Hazel brought her hand back and slapped her father across the face. The crack echoed like a gunshot through the silent ballroom. William spun and hit the floor, hard, blood immediately springing from his lip. Vivian screamed. Nathaniel Harrington's smug smile instantly vanished. Hazel looked down at the pathetic man who had tormented her. "I am Hazel Rosier," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound, undeniable authority. "I am 22 years old. I claim my full inheritance, and I claim this lord as my equal." She turned to look at Desmond, who was staring at her with such intense, burning adoration he looked ready to devour her. Hazel turned her attention to Nathaniel Harrington. "You want to challenge for me, Lord Harrington? Then step forward. But know this, I am not the prize. I am the executioner." The deafening silence in the grand ballroom was shattered by Lord Nathaniel Harrington's cold, cruel laughter. He leaned heavily on his silver-tipped cane, his pale eyes blazing with indignation and unrestrained malice. He looked at Hazel, taking in her magnificent, heavy curves draped in midnight blue velvet, and sneered. "An executioner!" Nathaniel mocked, his voice dripping with venomous condescension. "You are nothing but a bloated human blood bag, Hazel. You may wear the silks of a queen, but beneath that velvet you are just a pathetic, overgrown child, playing a dangerous game with apex predators. I will drain you dry and mount your oversized bones in my foyer." Desmond's roar shook the crystal chandeliers above. The sound was not human. It was the primordial, terrifying sound of an ancient beast unleashed. In a fraction of a second, the tailored elegance of the vampire lord dissolved. His bespoke midnight blue tuxedo tore at the shoulders as his musculature expanded his skin, turning a flawless marble white, while thick black veins pulsed furiously across his cheekbones. His eyes did not just glow crimson, they bled shadows. "Challenge accepted," Desmond hissed, his fangs fully extended, glistening with a deadly pearlescent sheen. The rules of the Syndicate's right of challenge were ancient and absolute. No weapons, no outside interference, to the true death. The surrounding vampires immediately formed a massive, sprawling circle in the center of the ballroom, their eyes wide with bloodthirsty anticipation. William and Vivian scrambled backward, crawling on their hands and knees like terrified vermin to escape the immediate blast zone. Nathaniel Harrington dropped his cane. His own transformation was swift, his features twisting into a grotesque bat-like visage. He lunged at Desmond with the speed of a striking viper. The two immortal lords collided with the force of a head-on train crash. The impact sent a shockwave through the room, shattering the nearest champagne flutes. Nathaniel threw a brutal clawed punch aimed directly at Desmond's throat. Desmond deflected it effortlessly, catching Nathaniel's wrist and twisting it with a sickening, audible snap. Nathaniel shrieked, but his free hand shot forward, burying his sharp claws deep into Desmond's ribs. Hazel gasped. Standing at the edge of the circle, she felt a sudden sharp phantom pain echo in her own side. The crimson bond she shared with Desmond, forged when he drank her rosier blood, was not just symbolic. It was profoundly physical. She could feel his fury, his pain, and his overwhelming, desperate need to protect her. "Desmond!" Hazel cried out, her voice cutting through the sounds of tearing flesh and snarling beasts. Desmond heard her. The sound of her voice was a catalyst. The rosier blood within his veins, dormant and simmering, suddenly ignited. A radiant golden aura momentarily flared beneath Desmond's pale skin. He grabbed Nathaniel by the lapels of his burgundy suit and head-butted the rival lord with bone-crushing force. Nathaniel stumbled backward, his nose completely caved in, black blood pouring down his chin. "You fight for territory, Nathaniel," Desmond purred, dangerously advancing on the staggering vampire. "You fight for greed, but I fight for my sovereign." In a desperate, cowardly move, Nathaniel reached into his ruined suit jacket and pulled out a hidden weapon, a jagged, pure silver dagger. The surrounding vampires hissed in collective outrage. Bringing a silver weapon to a formal rite of challenge was an unforgivable sacrilege. "If I cannot have the territory, neither will you," Nathaniel screamed, lunging forward to bury the silver blade into Desmond's heart. But he never reached him. Hazel did not think. She simply acted. Driven by a primal instinct she did not know she possessed, she stepped directly into the fighting circle. As Nathaniel lunged past her, Hazel reached out with her large, soft hand and grabbed the rival lord by his forearm. The moment Hazel's skin made contact with Nathaniel's, a horrific, sizzling sound filled the ballroom. Nathaniel screamed a high, piercing wail of pure agony. Where Hazel's fingers gripped him, his grey flesh was violently burning, bubbling and turning to black ash. The rosier blood running through Hazel's veins was an absolute miracle to the vampire she chose to bless, but it was a corrosive, lethal poison to any vampire who harbored ill intent toward her. "Let me go," Nathaniel shrieked, dropping the silver dagger as he thrashed wildly. Hazel stood her ground. Her heavy stature, which she had spent a lifetime hating, gave her an unshakable center of gravity. She anchored herself to the marble floor, her grip tightening on the burning vampire. She looked him dead in his pale, terrified eyes. "You called me a bloated blood bag," Hazel stated, her voice chillingly calm. "I am Hazel Rosier, and you are nothing but dust." With a forceful shove, Hazel pushed the screaming lord directly toward Desmond. Desmond caught Nathaniel by the throat. With one swift, merciless twist, Desmond completely severed Nathaniel Harrington's head from his shoulders. The rival lord's body dissolved into a massive pile of black ash before it even hit the ground. The severed head rolled to a stop at William Montgomery's feet, rapidly crumbling into dust. The ballroom was absolutely dead silent. Desmond stood victorious amidst the falling ash. He slowly turned toward Hazel. The monstrous, terrifying features faded from his face, replaced once again by breathtaking beauty. He walked over to her entirely, ignoring the hundreds of elite vampires watching their every move. He dropped to one knee, taking her soft, uninjured hand and pressing a reverent kiss against her knuckles. "My life is yours," Desmond whispered. Hazel smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that lit up the dark room. She gently pulled him to his feet. "And mine is yours, Desmond." She turned her attention to the two humans cowering in the corner. William and Vivian were violently shaking, covered in the dusting of Nathaniel's ashes. "Now," Hazel commanded, her voice ringing with absolute authority, "let us finish taking out the trash." The following morning, the storm over the Cascade Mountains finally broke, allowing pale winter sunlight to stream through the towering windows of Croft Manor's grand study. Hazel sat behind Desmond's massive oak desk, wearing a luxurious, deep plum cashmere sweater that perfectly complemented her soft, full figure. She felt entirely at peace, a steaming mug of Earl Grey tea resting in her hands. Standing nervously on the other side of the desk was Jonathan Preston, a senior managing partner at the prestigious human law firm of Davis Wright Tremaine in downtown Seattle. He adjusted his glasses, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature of the room. He knew exactly who Lord Croft was, and he knew better than to ask questions about the sudden dramatic shift in power. William and Vivian sat rigidly in two wooden chairs across from Hazel. They looked completely broken. Vivian's designer gown from the night before was ruined, stained with tears and vampire ash. William looked like he had aged 20 years overnight. His hands shook uncontrollably as he stared at his youngest daughter. "Mr. Preston," Hazel began, her tone thoroughly professional. "Do you have the documents?" "Yes, Miss Rosier," Jonathan replied hurriedly, opening his Italian leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal papers, stamped with official seals. "As instructed, we have fully audited the Rosier Trust. The $300 million previously held in escrow pending your 22nd birthday has been fully authorized for release. Furthermore, we have executed the immediate termination of William Montgomery's temporary conservatorship petition." William let out a pathetic whimper. "Hazel, please. You don't understand what you're doing. The syndicate debt. I still owe millions. If you take the trust, they will kill me. They will kill your sister." Hazel took a slow sip of her tea. She looked at Vivian, who was glaring at her with a mixture of terror and deeply ingrained hatred. "She is not my sister," Hazel corrected softly. "She is the product of your infidelity. And as for your debt, William, Lord Croft owns your debt now." Desmond stepped out from the shadows of the library. He wore a simple, tailored black shirt and dark trousers, looking every inch the lethal predator he was. He walked over to Hazel, coming to stand directly behind her chair. He placed his large, pale hands gently on her broad shoulders, a silent, terrifying warning to anyone who dared speak against her. "I hold your markers, William," Desmond stated, his voice a low, vibrating hum that made the humans flinch. "You owe the Croft Syndicate $50 million, but Hazel has graciously decided to settle your account on her terms." Jonathan Preston slid the documents across the desk toward William. "Mr. Montgomery, this is a total asset forfeiture agreement. You will sign over the Mercer Island estate, the 4 luxury vehicles, the yacht, and all remaining liquid assets in your name to the Rosier Trust. In exchange, Lord Croft will consider your $50 million debt fulfilled." Vivian gasped, jumping out of her chair. "Our house, our cars. You can't do that. You fat, jealous cow, you're stealing our entire lives." Desmond's eyes flashed crimson. The temperature in the room dropped instantly, freezing the tea in Hazel's mug. "Silence!" Desmond hissed, the single word hitting Vivian like a physical blow, forcing her back into her chair. "I am not stealing anything, Vivian," Hazel said calmly, reaching up to gently pat Desmond's hand, instantly calming the vampire's rage. The ice in her cup began to slowly melt. "I am simply taking back what you bought with stolen money. You lived off my mother's wealth while treating me like garbage. You starved me, you mocked my body, and you tried to sell me to a monster to save your own skin." Hazel leaned forward, her dark brown eyes locking onto her father. "Sign the papers, William, or Desmond will collect his $50 million in blood." William burst into tears. It was a pathetic, ugly sight, the great tech mogul reduced to a weeping mess. With a shaking, trembling hand, he took the gold Mont Blanc pen from Mr. Preston and signed his name on the dotted lines. With every stroke of the pen, he signed away his empire, his status, and his comfort. Jonathan Preston efficiently gathered the documents, placing them back into his briefcase. "It is entirely finalized, Miss Rosier. The Mercer Island property is now yours. I will file the deeds with the county clerk by noon." "Thank you, Jonathan. You are dismissed," Hazel said warmly. The lawyer bowed respectfully to Hazel, gave a terrified nod to Desmond, and quickly hurried out of the study. Hazel stood up. She smoothed down her cashmere sweater, standing tall and proud in her beautiful, bountiful body. She walked around the desk, stopping in front of William and Vivian. "What happens to us now?" William croaked, staring at the floor. "You leave," Hazel commanded. "You walk out of this manor with the clothes on your back. No cell phones, no credit cards, no safety nets. You are going to learn exactly what it feels like to be completely powerless and unwanted. You will work minimum wage jobs. You will struggle to pay rent in a tiny apartment. You will fade into complete obscurity. You're a monster, Vivian whispered, tears cutting tracks through her ruined makeup. No, Hazel replied, a soft, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She turned to look at Desmond, who was gazing at her with absolute unwavering devotion. I am perfectly human. I just happen to be fiercely loved by one. Felix, the golden-eyed vampire servant, suddenly materialized in the doorway. My lord, my lady, the front gates are open. Shall I escort the trash out? Please do, Felix, Desmond instructed, never taking his eyes off his queen. William and Vivian were forcefully dragged from the study, their protests and sobbing echoing down the long, ancient corridors of Croft Manor until the heavy front doors finally slammed shut, cutting off the sound entirely. The silence that followed was not heavy or oppressive. It was light. It was the sound of absolute freedom. Desmond closed the distance between them. He wrapped his strong arms securely around Hazel's thick, gorgeous waist, pulling her flush against his chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the intoxicating sweet scent of her rosier blood. You are magnificent, Desmond murmured against her skin, sending a delightful shiver down her spine. A true, merciless sovereign. The Syndicate will fear your name, and I will spend eternity worshipping it. Hazel wrapped her arms around his neck, looking up into his beautiful, immortal face. She had spent her entire life trying to shrink, trying to disappear, trying to apologize for her size and her existence. But here in the arms of a creature of the night, she had finally found the sunlight. She was allowed to take up space. She was allowed to be massive, powerful, and deeply, truly loved. Eternity, Hazel whispered, leaning in to press her soft, full lips against his cold, perfect mouth. That sounds like a wonderful place to start. The kiss sealed their bond, a vow spoken in blood magic and absolute acceptance. The Dark Lord had chosen the rejected sister, and in doing so he had crowned a queen. The ashes of Nathaniel Harrington barely had time to settle into the opulent carpets of Croft Manor before the whispers began. The supernatural underground of the Pacific Northwest was a tightly woven web of secrets, and by the time the weekend arrived, every vampire from Portland to Vancouver knew that Desmond Croft had not just claimed a human bride, but had crowned a rosier, and not just any rosier, a woman of immense, glorious substance who could incinerate an ancient lord with a single touch. Hazel spent the following weeks adjusting to her new reality, stepping fully out of the shadows of her past. She refused to hide her fat body any longer. Instead, she adorned it. One crisp Tuesday morning, she sat at her custom mahogany vanity, while Evelyn, the head housekeeper, clasped a breathtaking vintage Cartier diamond necklace around her thick, soft neck. The jewels rested perfectly against her generous cleavage, pushed up by a custom-tailored agent provocateur silk corset in deep burgundy. Hazel looked at her reflection, admiring the lush roundness of her cheeks, the heavy, majestic slope of her shoulders, and the magnificent wide flare of her hips. She was fat, and she was an absolute force of nature. You look devastating, my queen, Desmond murmured, stepping into the master suite. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford three-piece suit that hugged his broad, lethal frame. He approached her from behind, resting his large, pale hands gently upon her plush, heavy thighs. The contrast between his cold, immortal skin and her radiant, thick, blood-warmed flesh was a constant source of intoxication for him. I feel devastating, Hazel replied, leaning her head back against his solid chest. But we have a problem, do we not? Felix mentioned an arrival from the European High Council. Desmond's crimson eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. Word of your bloodline has reached the old continent. Lord Bastian Sinclair has arrived in Seattle. He is currently occupying the penthouse suite at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. He has requested a formal audience tonight at the Loop Lounge at the top of the Space Needle. He rented the entire floor. Hazel frowned, her thick, expressive eyebrows drawing together. Requested or demanded? A bit of both, Desmond admitted, his fangs grazing the sensitive skin right above the Cartier necklace. Bastian is a purist. He believes humans are merely cattle. He does not believe a human woman, especially one who does not fit their archaic, fragile standards of beauty, can hold dominion over a territory. He intends to test you, Hazel. He intends to see if your rosier blood is truly active, or if I am simply under a spell. Hazel stood up, her heavy velvet skirts rustling around her legs. She did not feel the familiar icy grip of panic that would have paralyzed her a month ago. Instead, she felt a deep, thrumming surge of protective fury. Her fatness, which her father had treated as a grotesque liability, gave her an unshakable physical presence. She took up space, and she would make this European lord respect every single inch of it. "Then let him test me," Hazel said, her voice dropping to a cool, commanding register. "Prepare the Mercedes Maybach, Desmond. We are going to the city. It is time the High Council learned exactly who rules this coast." The drive into downtown Seattle was tense, the city lights reflecting off the rain-slicked pavement as the heavily armored Maybach glided through the streets. Felix drove while Hazel and Desmond sat in the spacious back seat. Desmond held her soft, plump hand tightly in his own, his thumb drawing slow, soothing circles over her knuckles. He was ready to slaughter the entire European delegation if Bastian showed her even a shred of disrespect. When they arrived at the Space Needle, the usual bustling crowds were entirely absent. The syndicate had cleared the area. Hazel stepped out of the luxury vehicle, the frigid December wind whipping her dark hair around her face. She wore a heavy floor-length fur coat over her burgundy corset and skirt, looking every inch a mobster queen. She linked her arm through Desmond's, and together they entered the private elevator. As the glass elevator shot up into the night sky, Hazel felt her heart beat a steady, powerful rhythm. The doors slid open to the loop lounge, the rotating glass floor revealing the dizzying drop to the city below. Standing at the far end of the room, flanked by 4 massive, heavily armed vampire guards, was Lord Bastian Sinclair. Lord Bastian Sinclair was terrifying to behold. He was impossibly tall, gaunt, and dressed in an immaculate old-world velvet frock coat. His eyes were not crimson like Desmond's, but a swirling, bottomless black. As Hazel and Desmond approached, Bastian's black eyes locked onto Hazel, roaming over her heavy, robust figure with blatant, unmistakable skepticism. "Desmond Croft," Bastian greeted, his voice echoing like stones scraping inside a tomb. "You have caused quite a disruption in the natural order, and this is the creature you claim as your equal, a mortal woman who looks as though she has consumed half the livestock in your territory." The 4 guards chuckled, a low, menacing sound. Desmond lunged forward, a feral, earth-shattering snarl ripping from his throat, but Hazel immediately threw her thick arm across his chest, stopping him dead in his tracks. Desmond practically vibrated with homicidal rage, his fangs fully descended, but he obeyed her touch instantly. The sheer display of control, a massive fat human woman physically halting a raging vampire lord, made the guards abruptly stop laughing. Hazel stepped forward, dropping her fur coat onto a nearby leather chair. She stood proudly under the ambient lighting, her large, soft stomach and wide hips proudly displayed in her tailored garments. She looked directly into Bastian Sinclair's bottomless black eyes without a single flinch. "I consume exactly what I please, Lord Sinclair," Hazel stated smoothly, her voice carrying a resonant, unbothered confidence. "Just as I command exactly who I please. You came all this way from Europe to question my legitimacy. Speak your piece so I can return to my home." Bastian's eyes narrowed. "Arrogance in a blood bag is a fatal flaw. You think your Rosier lineage protects you? Let us see how strong your mind is, little piggy." Without warning, Bastian stepped forward and unleashed a wave of ancient vampiric mesmerism. It was a psychic attack so powerful it caused the glass windows of the Space Needle to spiderweb with tiny cracks. The sheer force of it was designed to crush a human's free will, instantly forcing them to their knees in absolute obedience. Desmond shouted her name in panic, unable to block the invisible psychic strike. The mental wave slammed into Hazel. She felt a sudden sharp pressure against her temples, like a heavy migraine trying to take root. But then the legendary sweet blood in her veins reacted. Her heart pumped a massive hot surge of golden energy through her heavy, thick veins. The fat on her body, the physical substance she possessed, acted as a grounding rod, absorbing the psychic shockwave and neutralizing it completely. Hazel didn't fall. She didn't even blink. She simply stood there, her hands resting calmly on her wide hips. Bastian staggered backward, clutching his head in profound shock. His mesmerism had shattered against her mind, like glass against a titanium vault. "Impossible!" he gasped, staring at her heavy, unbothered frame. "No human can withstand the command of an ancient." "I am not just human," Hazel corrected, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the ancient lord. "I am the sovereign of the Pacific Northwest, and you are standing in my city." Hazel reached out her plump hand, grabbing Bastian by the lapels of his velvet coat. The moment her skin touched him, the same terrifying, sizzling heat that had destroyed Nathaniel Harrington fled to life. Bastian hissed in agony as the rosier blood burned his immortal flesh through the fabric. But Hazel didn't push him away. She pulled him down, forcing the towering ancient to look directly into her eyes. "You will return to the High Council," Hazel commanded, her voice echoing with supernatural authority. "You will tell them that Desmond Croft is the apex of this continent, empowered by my blood. You will tell them that Hazel Rosier rules by his side. And if any of you ever disrespect my body, my bond, or my territory again, I will personally travel to Europe and turn your entire council into a pile of ash. Do you understand me?" The agonizing burn of her touch and the sheer crushing weight of her physical and spiritual presence broke the ancient lord's pride. Bastian Sinclair, a vampire who had walked the earth for 1,000 years, dropped to his knees before the fat, magnificent human from Mercer Island. "I understand, Sovereign," Bastian choked out, his black eyes wide with genuine terror and awe. "The council will acknowledge your reign. The territory is yours." Hazel let go of his coat. She turned her back on the kneeling ancient, a gesture of absolute dominance, and walked back to Desmond. Desmond looked at her as if she had hung the moon and the stars. He wrapped his arms securely around her waist, pulling her heavy, gorgeous body flush against his side. They walked out of the Loop Lounge in silence, leaving the European delegation trembling in their wake. Later that night, back in the warmth and safety of Croft Manor, the storm outside had settled into a quiet, peaceful snowfall. Hazel lay in the center of the massive, velvet-draped four-poster bed. She was entirely bare, completely unashamed of her soft rolls, her stretch marks, and her heavy thighs. Desmond lay beside her, tracing the intricate silver scars of her past with a gentle, reverent fingertip. "You terrified him," Desmond whispered, his crimson eyes glowing softly in the dim firelight. "You terrified an ancient. You are the most magnificent creature to ever walk this earth, Hazel." Hazel smiled, pulling his cold, perfectly sculpted body on top of her warm, plush curves. "We terrified him, Desmond. We are a team. Always," he vowed, leaning down to press a deep, passionate kiss against her lips. Her father had begged the monster to take the pretty one, but the Dark Lord had known the truth all along. True power, true beauty, and true royalty didn't come in a fragile, starving package. It came in the form of a fat, unstoppable queen who possessed the courage to claim her throne and the blood to burn the world down if anyone tried to take it from her. Hazel Rosier was no longer the rejected sister. She was the absolute, undisputed sovereign of the night. And that brings us to the epic conclusion of Hazel and Desmond's unforgettable story. What started as a cruel betrayal turned into a magnificent tale of empowerment, proving that true power and beauty come in all shapes and sizes. Hazel didn't just survive the dark and dangerous world of vampires, she conquered it completely. What was your absolute favorite moment from Hazel's journey to becoming the Sovereign? Let us know in the comments below. If you loved this vampire romance drama, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories.